Hello and welcome to the SciFirst MovieTalk episode. So in this episode I'll be discussing the 2017 giant creature feature Kong, Skull Island, as directed by Jordan Vogt-Roberts. So, in fact, this film is actually about the 11th film in the overall King Kong franchise. And I use that word very loosely as there is actually very little in the way of a connection or canon between any of the movies. The King Kong, he does have a very fractured past at best. So, in fact, like 2014's Godzilla, this movie forms its own reboot series for Kong. Again, not connected with any of the previous movies featuring the titular character, but is based on the general mythology of the lovable giant ape. I mean, King Kong, he has more of a fractured past than Godzilla does. I mean, there isn't actually one particular kind of thread. There's a couple of films that have sequels, but King Kong, he doesn't have kind of like the continuity that Godzilla does in Godzilla's franchise. Godzilla's is fractured too, to some extent, but more coherent overall. Kong, he only had a few outings where he had a sequel or so, and then even then, not so good. Yeah, they're a bit dodgy at best, but this film actually indeed forms the second film in what has become known as the Legendaries Monarch Monsterverse, where indeed Kong and Godzilla share the same universe, featuring a number of other gigantic creatures, or titans if you will, making the ultimate creature feature series, which started with the 2014 movie Godzilla. This movie, however, does take a step back from the world created in Godzilla to bring us something a bit more raw and untouched. Set in 1973, just at the point the US pulled out of the Vietnam War, this movie examines the early years of the monster-searching organisation known as Monarch, that we come to know in Godzilla, but here we see them actually on the brink of being shut down, completely broke, and the laughingstock of the government agencies, from humble beginnings, indeed. Two scientists, Bill Randa, as played by John Goodman, and Houston Brooks, as played by Corey Hawkins, working for Monarch, have been able to find the location of a notorious and mysterious island known as Skull Island, on which they believe may exist life forms the likes of which have never before been seen, and mount an expedition along with an escort made up of the detachment of the US Army shipping out from Vietnam, headed up by Lieutenant Colonel Preston Packard, as played by Samuel L. Jackson, ex-British Special Air Service Captain James Conway, as played by Tom Hiddleston, and anti-war photographer Mason Weaver, as played by Brie Larson, amongst others. But a few names there that a few of you might remember. In fact, this movie has quite an ensemble of cast with some very big names. Indeed, quite a lot of the MCU. So for those who don't know, that's the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So obviously the grand that is Marvel. And at one point, it did almost feel like we had an MCU Mexican standoff. It of course, quite bizarre now, of course, to see, given that there's such a multitude of actors and actresses that have indeed been involved in the Marvel Universe. Sometimes it's kind of hard to remember that each of them did have a life outside once, you know? But anyway, once our team get to the island, it isn't long at all before they have their first encounter with one of the inhabitants of the island, namely Kong, who's a bit arced, to say the least, that these visitors have come to his island like they own the place. Soon, the team find themselves stranded on the island and find out to their detriment that there are far worse things on the island than Kong. But in the process, they team up with World War II fighter pilot, US Army Air Forces Lieutenant Hank Marlowe, as played by John C. Reilly. Yep, another one from the MCU, who got stranded on the island back in 1944. Together, the survivors, they must find a way to escape the island in time to get to their arranged rendezvous point, or risk being stranded on the island indefinitely. So, I found this movie to be simply fantastic. I can't say that it's the best Kong movie, a bit like Godzilla, because like the Godzilla franchise, I haven't seen enough of the early classics to really confirm either way. I just know that some of the sequels are a bit dud. From what I've heard, I mean, I might love them, probably will. I love everything else, but it certainly stands its ground, this movie. But it is different from the more kind of traditional Kong movies to such an extent that this Kong pretty much is a reset overall and part of a much bigger picture. Although it does actually work fantastically well as a standalone movie with no issues. This Kong is not so much a wild beast that must be tamed, but a protector, a guardian, if you will, revered by the people native to the island, and one which has compassion and a true sense of being. It does have a few moments which are relevant to the more traditional King Kong story for sure. The humanity, as Kong emphasises with his human counterparts, especially Brie Larson's character, the mysterious island, the native people and their superstitions, but they've kind of all been updated to appeal to a more modern audience, and more so, obviously, to fit in with this ever-evolving universe in which Kong resides. So in this, it does draw on a number of elements we have seen in some fashion before, and pays homage to some of the classic elements. You know, even the swatting of the planes has a spectacular twist here, but evolved to carve a new path for Kong. One which does give us, you know, gives him yet a more purposeful and indeed a more kind of interlinked future. I did like its individuality from the other movies, and overall I think it did work exceptionally well to kind of set it apart from those other movies to such an extent that you're not constantly trying to sit there comparing this to them. Indeed, it is a very different breed. From the very offset, this does feel like an adventure, and it certainly doesn't disappoint. It combines some real old school land before time mystery and anticipation with a fantastic modern twist set against the 1970s war backdrop. There are some really inspired creature creations, although I did actually find that the film's main antagonist, known as the Skullcrawler, which, whilst being very ferocious and certainly decently scary, kind of just felt a little bit more like a generic lizard monster. But it does still make for one spectacular battle with Kong, so, you know, who am I to complain? The human side of things is much better than expected, much more involved and rounded characters than we actually got in Godzilla. There are a fair few of them, to be fair, when all's said and done, but there did obviously need to be some monster fodder here, you know? And since Kong kind of obliterates half of the US Army with his right hook upon their arrival, it wouldn't have left too many others for the rest of the creatures nasties in this movie to kind of chomp on. So I do get that from that point of view, you know? There are a couple of hits and misses along the way and a couple of characters which were kind of underused. But overall, I think the movie's balance does work really well against the epic nature of the monstrous counterparts to kind of bring us a selection of characters we can get involved with and examine from both a light-hearted standpoint, at times right through to some quite emotional scenes. Indeed, there were really some kind of heartwarming tales and moments, and unexpectedly, it had quite a decent comedy edge, mostly provided by John C. Reilly, who really, when all said and done, was only second only to Kong himself as one of the standout roles of the movie. So, from a cinematography standpoint, we do have some stunning and immensely impressive shots of Skull Island. It is a imposing island, to say the least, as we kind of approach it, and the landscape that's kind of set in the movie is outstanding. Kong has himself been beautifully set in CGI, and the level of detail is superb, to kind of say the least. There are some kind of underlying threads as well within the movie, within the story itself, which is kind of pretty involved, I would say, for a monster flick, at the very least. It doesn't set any new ground, but the film does teach us that things might not always be what they seem at first, and how different experiences and points of view can certainly shape how we come to attack a problem, or a big ape, playing on our fears of that we don't yet understand. How sometimes even the worst of enemies can indeed become the best of friends, or at least have a newfound respect for one another. And this kind of thread, it transects both Kong and his human counterparts. So, overall, this was quite a captivating film, all told, with a great cast, some great comedy, but also some quite jumpy and indeed reasonably dark and scary moments too. Kong is certainly intense and has quite a decent amount of screen time for me. In fact, the film as a whole is quite well balanced throughout, getting you right into that action within a world full of these fantastical creatures. We definitely get the feeling that we are only really glimpsing a very small proportion of this world. Roll on Godzilla versus Kong, that's all I can say. It may not perhaps be the best Kong film, again, like I said with the Godzilla, that I do have to reserve judgment for after I've watched a few more. But it doesn't try to be, I don't think. This is part of a much bigger picture. It is still an absolutely fantastic film, though. And although part of this bigger universe, this film works exceedingly well on its own merits. Monarch in this is simply a facilitation. We concentrate on Kong here and give him a standalone outing that Mr. and Mrs. Kong would be proud of. And so in this, absolutely another excellent creature feature for sure. So that brings me to the end of this episode. Many thanks for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please leave a like. Please do hit that subscribe button for more movie reviews, trailer reactions, and other movie-related content. Definitely love to have had you at SciFirst MovieTalk. What I want to say is definitely want to see you back for Godzilla vs Kong back at the end of the week. I am so looking forward to that. But yes, thank you so much for joining me. Goodbye.